I have told you this before it happens, so that when it happens, you may believe. I'm sure all of us today were extremely anxious. I'm sure our hearts were beating faster than normal. If you took your pulse during lunch, you probably noticed it was racing a little bit faster. The excitement was building as the day was progressing, wasn't it? You and I were waiting for this moment, for this very, very moment, when finally the last will and testament would be opened and read. And you and I will finally find out what our true inheritance is going to be. Did you feel your heart racing? Did you hear your pulse quickening? Did you sense a spirit of excitement as the day was progressing? Most importantly, are you happy with what you got? Are you pleased with the outcome? Is what was read in the will and testament exactly what you were hoping for? Peace is my gift to you. My peace I give you. That, my friends, is the inheritance that Jesus gives every single one of us. Not as the world gives it, do I give it. Jesus says, no, not at all. But it's the gift that I give to you. I give this gift to you, and I give it and I tell you about it before it happens, so that when it happens, well, then you'll become a believer. So let me ask the question again. You don't need to answer it out loud. Are you happy with your inheritance? Is peace enough? Or were you hoping for a little money? Would be nice, wouldn't it? But money, we would just spend. Maybe we were thinking in the inheritance there would be some sentimental trinkets that might be left our way. But my friends, those just sit on a shelf and they collect dust. Maybe we were hoping for something even more. Maybe it's not money, maybe it's not sentimental trinkets, but maybe it was that piece of antique furniture that we had loved and that we had coveted the whole time when we were children growing up and hoping that one day it would be ours. But antique furniture just becomes, with each passing day, more antique. So Jesus gives to us what truly lasts, what has meaning in our lives. Jesus' last will and testament is about relationships. Jesus wants his disciples to never be divided, but rather that they might always come and be and led by the Spirit together. So Jesus' last will and testament, as he's saying his final words to the disciples before he suffers and dies and is crucified, and why then 3 days later is risen from the dead, he's simply telling them that this is what he's going to give them: peace. Several years ago, I had a funeral. And the funeral was an elderly woman whose prayer every day for so many years, actually for 30 years, was that her two sons would reconcile. They hadn't spoken to each other in 30 years. And to help the situation out so that they didn't have to talk to one another, one lived on the East Coast and the other the West Coast. They never saw one another, and they never talked to one another for 30 years. And the mother prayed. She prayed for peace. She prayed that one day those two boys of hers could come together geographically and with love. She didn't physically see it happen, but she saw it happen. It happened the night of her visitation, when the two sons were forced to come together and to meet in the Midwest where their mother lived. And that night at the visitation, the tension between those two men was so thick you could cut it with a knife. They stayed on opposite sides of the room, and they didn't talk to one another. They visited with the people that came and paid their respects to them and to their mother. And of course, I was there and led the prayer service and wasn't quite sure what might take place, but nonetheless, the evening went on and the visitation came and it went, and we all went our separate ways. But we gathered back in the church that morning for the funeral mass. And the two sons walked in together. They were looking a bit shabby. They hadn't showered, it was quite obvious, that morning, nor had they shaved. You see, they had been up all night. All night they stayed up. They stayed up as the darkness continued to envelop the world in which they were living and this relationship of theirs that had been defined by darkness for 30 years. And they chose to sit down with one another and to visit and to talk and to communicate with one another, something they hadn't done for 30 years. And all night long, they stayed up and they kept talking. And they cried and they shared stories and they remembered and they gave thanks. And ultimately, they arrived here, looking a bit shabby, but both with a smile on their face. Because you see, my friends, they chose to push darkness away. And they did it with the gift of love. That gift of love and peace that was given to them by a loving God through their parents, especially their mother, who prayed for them every single day. Now, I wish I could tell you more countless stories of a happy ending like that, but we all know that so oftentimes there is division within our own families, within our own relationships, and those grudges and those hardships and those difficulties have created a chasm in our lives and in our relationships, and so we've chosen to allow the darkness to have the final say. But no, Jesus doesn't want that. He wants you and I to grab a hold of our inheritance that is always there, and it's found in the gift of peace. And when we grab a hold of that inheritance, and when we use it each and every day to try to restore the relationships that need to be restored, that we try to continue to build upon those relationships that are in good health, when we give the gift of peace to one another, my friends, then we know our true and our real inheritance. And the good news is, that's all we need.